evening, everyone. It is Monday night, June 19th, 2023. It's the 7 year anniversary of the greatest comeback in NBA history or the greatest choke in NBA history, depending on what side of the fence you're sitting on, as it's the 7 year anniversary of the Cleveland Cavaliers overcoming a 3-1 deficit to beat the Golden State Warriors for their first NBA championship, breaking Cleveland's 52-year championship curse. But we had the U.S. Open over the weekend. We had a lot of great baseball over the weekend. But one of the other stories that came out was going into the weekend and then just kind of progressed, and that was the sudden resignation of West Virginia head coach Bob Huggins, the legendary Bob Huggins. Now, the story originally began on late Friday, where it was reported that Huggins was arrested in Cincinnati for driving under the influence, and I'm sorry, not in Cincinnati, in Pittsburgh. We'll get back to Cincinnati here in a couple of moments because there's another aspect to that story. But the legal blood alcohol limit in the state of Pennsylvania is 0.08, and reportedly Huggins blew a 0.21 to where he had shredded a tire, and then when officers arrived on scene, Huggins had the door open. There were open containers or empty containers on the floorboard, and I believe there was reported like one was even in the street. He failed his field sobriety test. So this was actually Huggins' second arrest for driving under the influence. The first was back in 2004 when he was in Cincinnati, and subsequently the butting of the heads between him and the Cincinnati University president at the time led to Huggins eventually stepping down after the 2005 postseason. He took the Kansas State job for a year before the job opened up at West Virginia, which was always his dream job. Huggins was born in Morgantown. He's 69 years old. He's going to be 70 in September. He went to school at West Virginia. He was a member of their basketball team. So for him to be able to come home to a place where he grew up and also went to school, all aspects of his life, had to be a dream come true. And then a few years ago, coming out of the COVID bubble, where you had the NCAA tournament in host sites, Huggins joined Roy Williams as the only head coaches in NCAA history to accomplish 300 wins at two different schools. Remember, Roy Williams did it at Kansas and at North Carolina. Huggins did it at Cincinnati and West Virginia. The only difference is that Roy Williams won a national championship at both, and Huggins only got to Final Fours in both. Ironically enough, when Huggins got to the Final Four with Cincinnati in 1992, and then also with West Virginia in 2010, it was his third year at both schools. So how's that for irony in terms of staying the course here? Huggins went to 9 Sweet 16s. He had 3 Elite Eights and the 2 Final Four appearances. But Cincinnati really hadn't been the same since Huggins left, when he brought them up to a national power. West Virginia is a completely different animal, because West Virginia was going from the Big East and then made the transition to the Big 12 and never really found their footing to be one of the more dominant teams in the conference. But then again, when you're going up against teams like Texas, and then the emergence of Baylor in recent years, and then of course Kansas, your best bet is to trying to get to 20 wins, get a decent at-large bid in the NCAA tournament, where you're going to be where there's not going to be 2 numbers next to your seating instead of just 1. But really, since that 2010 national championship appearance, West Virginia had not been out of the first weekend of the tournament. There were a whole litany of round of 64 and round of 32 exits. But Huggins will finish with I believe it was 343 wins at West Virginia. He ranks currently 8th on the all-time NCAA wins list. But the key component there is that he's also third on Division I coaches, and the only two he ranks behind are Jim Boeheim at Syracuse and Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. Even though Krzyzewski did also have a couple of years with Army before the Duke run. But naturally, Huggins between people forget that he also got Akron into the NCAA tournament during his first job. I want to say it was his second year in Akron. Then went to Cincinnati. We remember he became a household name. Then that 1 year stint at Kansas State after taking a year off after leaving the Cincinnati job, and then headed to Morgantown in 2007 and has been there really ever since. But the problem is that it wasn't so much the DUI, it was also how closely it came after recent comments he made on a Cincinnati talk show named the Bill Cunningham Show. Now, Bill Cunningham, after doing my research, is he's an attorney, he's an entrepreneur, but he's also a strong conservative commentator who's also been labeled as kind of a propriety of hate speech in years. Now, Huggins was actually quoted as making anti-gay and anti-Catholic comments, and here's the two bits of irony on that. Making the anti-gay remarks, you'd figure on Cunningham's type show would be par for the course, but you also figure the strong conservative and Christian Catholic values that Cunningham stands for, the anti-Catholic comments would have had more blowback than anything, at least for Cunningham. There were a lot of media that were already calling for Huggins to be fired last month, but after this most recent incident, nearly 3 times the legal limit over the weekend, unfortunately, West Virginia did not have a choice in this matter. They had to part ways with Huggins. Now, in the immediate wake of the Cunningham comments, Huggins his salary was reduced to just $1 million, and then his contract was restructured to where he would only be guaranteed through this year. So essentially, it was going to be a year-to-year type deal. But if you want to talk parallels, we talked about the Final Four appearances in the third year of the two schools, kind of bringing them back to prominence. We talked about Huggins growing up and being born in Morgantown, going to school in Morgantown, coaching Morgantown, and getting them right on the cusp of a national championship. But the other aspect is that Huggins, again, third on the all-time wins list with 935. Only in Division I, the only two guys he trails, Boeheim and Krzyzewski, in order. But let's also keep in mind that in the last 18 months now, we've seen Huggins, Boeheim, and Krzyzewski all leave. Krzyzewski retired after the greatest career in the history of college basketball. Krzyzewski is the all-time wins leader in all of college basketball. Boeheim had a falling out, really that spilled over this past season, but it had been billowing for the last couple of years. You didn't really see a whole lot of that with Huggins, but the problem is that his two exits were both stemming from poor personal decisions with the DUIs, and then the fallout from there. When he left in Cincinnati, again, it was butting heads with the university president, and then taking the gap year, and then resuming his coaching career. But now, at 69 years old, he's gonna be 70 in September. Would have been 70 at the start of the season. You'd figure he would need probably 3 to 4 more years, which would have taken him to 74, 75 to join Krzyzewski and passing Boeheim to get to the 1,000 wins plateau. And that's being fortunate. 65 wins, that's 15 a year. Even though things would have gotten a little bit easier for West Virginia, we'll talk about that here in a second. But his exit now creates a big hole in a program that really is trying to find its identity, because West Virginia is always going to be, they're always going to be around an at-large team. They're always going to be right in the middle of the Big 12, but they don't have a whole lot of options out there right now. A lot of people are thinking they're going to go from within, even though the university said in a statement after Huggins said in his statement that he was going to retire in the immediate aftermath of stepping down on Saturday, that they were going to do a national search. Well, who really is out there? Because now we're right in the middle of summer recruiting, and then you got the transfer protocol. ESPN just came out with their top 100 recruits in the transfer protocol right now, and I want to say most of those players have already kind of committed to their new schools and are already, getting ready to come back for the summer and the off-season conditioning. But you have to think that this is going to throw a huge, huge wrench into West Virginia, because now all of these players that were committed there have the ability to now jump into the transfer protocol, with Huggins leaving, because a lot of them committed to be able to play for Bob Huggins. Bob Huggins is not there anymore. Their options are limited. So these players now actually have the choice that unfortunately West Virginia did not have, that Huggins did not give them by using better judgment over the weekend. And there's a lot of luster off the Huggy Bear nickname that Huggins attained over the years. But it's not what the Big 12 wanted going into this year, because you've got Texas and Oklahoma getting ready to leave for the SEC. You've got those 4 other schools getting ready to join the Big 12, but certainly not on par of these. What's going to happen with the Big 12? The Big 12 is going to end up, sliding back to where they're like a Conference USA type, more so in basketball, whereas you're going to have or it even could be kind of like what the West Coast is. You're going to have Kansas State, Baylor, and maybe 1 or 2 others that could challenge every year. Maybe like an Iowa State jumps up out of there, but then you're going to have a whole lot of mediocrity right there in the middle, and nobody who's going to really jump off the page to be able to challenge Kansas, because Kansas isn't going to go anywhere. Kansas State made a good run a couple of years ago. Kansas State is a strong football school. Kansas had a good football year, but stereotypically Kansas is a much better basketball school because their football program is straight up garbage most years, usually in a bottom 25 and certainly a laughing stock most seasons. West Virginia is a good football school for the Big 12, although they've got to go halfway across the country for any of their road games. Let's be honest. After leaving the Big East, Mike and I will probably talk about that on the Wise Guys as we lead closer to college football season. But again, you've now seen the 3 greatest coaches in the history of college basketball in terms of all-time wins in Division I now leave over the last 18 months, and there's a lot of big shoes to fill. Now, John Shire's done a pretty good job already in that first year at Duke, and people are going to, even though it's not going to be playing for Coach K, you're still playing for Duke. North Carolina's got in kind of a transition period after reaching the championship game a couple of years ago, took a major step back this year. What happens with North Carolina? What happens with Syracuse? Duke is still going to be on the up and up, but in a very, very tumultuous situation in the Big 12, who's going to be able to fill this Hall of Famer's shoes? Because Huggins, in his 17 years, ended up finishing second on the school's all-time wins record. He was never going to catch number 1, because I want to say the number 1 there had just literally a couple of victories shy of 500. So that would mean that Huggins would have had to achieve 140 more wins, which means he would have been coaching until he was 80, and then he not only would have caught Krzyzewski, he would have been right on Krzyzewski's butt without a national championship to his credit, unless something else transpired here. So let me know what you guys think. Did West Virginia have a choice in this matter? Did Huggins leave them no choice? What do you think happens with the program? Who do you think could potentially come in because there's a very good possibility they could promote within. The two biggest names that I actually saw, Mick Cronin is not going to leave UCLA because he was an assistant under Huggins, and then Joe Mazzulla was also an assistant under Huggins at one point in his career. But Joe Mazzulla just took the Boston Celtics to 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals, even though he got lambasted in the media for the near epic, well, actually for the epic choke job that they just did against the Miami Heat, going down 3-0 and then getting blown out on their home floor in Game 7. So let me know what you guys think. And Mike and I will have a Wise Guys this week. We're right now targeting Friday night because I think I got plans on Saturday. Worst case, it'll be Sunday. But we will actually have something posted to our Facebook and Twitter accounts later on this week. And we will see you guys certainly this weekend. And I hopefully we'll be back with you guys before we go live on Friday or Sunday night. Take care.